Okay, so welcome back to session 4, the last session of our 4-session series. What are we going to do today? Well, we're going to not just debrief session 3, our session about budgets, but I'd love to hear from each of you kind of where you are on your journey with taking in the content from the class, or if you have a project that you're working on, just where you're at and what you've accomplished. So then the content for today is we're going to talk about kind of the stuff that's around actually getting grants submitted, and that's what goes into a grant report and what are site visits and why are they important. The main content that we're going to talk about today is evaluation work, what it is, and what it looks like. And then, as we've mentioned before, we will have another guest after we take the break at 4 o'clock. We're going to be joined by Deb Vaughn from the Oregon Community Foundation. And she's going to give us an overview of what the foundation does, how it's structured, and the different kind of grant programs that they have. There's one big grant program that they have, the Community Grants Program. That's the one Rhonda's going to go after, and I know some of the others of you are as well. And she's going to provide a link to a webinar that will give you an hour of details about that program, because the deadline for that program is the end of March. But she's going to focus on just introducing you to who the foundation is and how they operate. Okay, so the last homework, after you finished the project charter and after you did the one-pager, was to go ahead and start looking at who do you want to submit a grant to look and see what they need for their budget, and to start creating your project budget. And when you're ready, to get it to me. So that's what we left you with. And I know a lot of you are busy, but what I'd like to do is just check in with some folks and find out where you are on your project and any hurdles that you have overcome to move stuff forward. So Rhonda gave us a little summary of her outdoor play structure. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Rhonda? Okay, no, she's good. So who else would like to do a check-in on what they've accomplished? Yeah, Carly.
Hi there, and I'm just coming from audio today because I don't have great internet connectivity. We have had to put a little bit of a pause because we're between executive directors currently, but we were able to start creating narratives and some of the sample draft budgets to look at ways of improving our training access. We do a lot of online training for folks and really thinking about how we can sustain that and make that more available to more Oregonians going forward. So we've started those draft budgets and the timeline and looking at potential funders. We just had to slow down a little bit this last couple of weeks while we're waiting for our new directors to join us. But that's where we're at.
Terrific. Thanks, Carly. And we'd love to see the budgets and have a conversation with you about where you're at when you're ready for it.
Thank you.
Amber, what are you up to?
Well, I have to say that the charter came in handy on Monday, just to backtrack a second, because I was emailed a grant that had a deadline of 5 o'clock on Monday. And because I had the notes in there and I already have a file, because I learned from your previous class to keep, I have a file of all the things you typically need for a grant. Probably knocked the whole thing out in like 2 hours because I had the core things set up. And since then, I've also, in the last few months, took all the typical narratives that I write in both grant writing, like reporting, and then also for this type of grant writing. And I've made a spreadsheet by topic. And so because I had that, I just could yank and rearrange. So that was good. And I wrote it for the project with the shelter. So we are working on a remodel of our shelter and shifting a couple of spaces around to repurpose them. And our flooring has been installed now. I just went and took a look at it. There are a few things that still need to be tweaked, but so that was our biggest thing. And then next we'll be moving towards beds and other stuff. So we're in a place of now reevaluating where the budget, like the flooring was the biggest part of that. And now just assess like the little changes that need to happen. Are they going to cost us more? And we've, I don't remember if I've talked about it in this space. We were lucky enough to leverage a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. And so a lot of the prep work that normally the flooring company would do, we got Habitat volunteers in. So they like shaved the doors down and took everything off and moved it. So the next steps, other than assessing where we're at, is that in April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we'll be putting a 4-page spread in the newspaper, and one part will be our services, one part will be other announcements and other things, and SAM, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. But then there'll be a whole section that's that before and after. We've broken our remodel into 3 phases, and we're almost done. By the time this goes out in the newspaper, we'll be done with phase 2 and 3, or 1 and 2. And so the plan is to really roll out that campaign, like giving campaign. And so, which will then help us leverage the next phase, which we'll want to be writing. That's what the foundation grant will be for. So we're taking the 4th phase is we're taking a storage area unit that's actually rather large, and we're shifting it into what is just staff needs to get and what we want clients to access, and then making that big space into a meeting space, because our conference room was small and we couldn't have like a house meeting there. So we'll have computer banks, and it's large enough space that we'll be able to create distanced, like a couch area over here and maybe some loungy beanbaggy kind of things in one corner, and maybe like a TV that has, I don't know, there's lots of room. So that will be what we leverage next off of these other things. So we're moving, there's a lot of moving parts on top of, everything else that has to happen, but pretty hopeful. And it's nice to think about something that is moving forward instead of just always fixing what's wrong. So I'm excited about that.
Terrific. And I love that you're basically using your reporting on what happened to share with the community as your funding campaign. Here's what we can do. Terrific. Anybody else like to share a success? To me, it's a success just to congratulate yourself on participating in the workshop and honoring that you've learned a lot, even if you haven't applied it yet to a project. You've built your capacity to do this in the future, and that's a real positive thing. Okay, let us know if you would like to share more about your project. I want to remind you, now I'm sharing my email again, but you all also have Leah's email, and either one of us are going to be available to help. If you send us an email and say you'd like to schedule some time, we'll give you a couple of dates and we can come up with a time to do a Zoom meeting, and we can talk about next steps. We can talk with you about being stuck and not knowing what to do, or if you have questions about funders, we can maybe give you some suggestions. I know quite a bit about those common funders in Oregon, and so does Leah. So we might be able to offer you some advice about how much to ask for is an organization that might not have gone to an organization before. Just because an organization says you can ask for up to $50,000, like the Oregon Community Foundation, that doesn't mean that that's a smart strategy the first time you ask them for funds, for example. Right, Leah?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was always my practice that if I was writing a grant to a particular foundation for the first time, I would make that project small, really achievable, really clearly defined outcomes, a really clearly defined start and finish, so that when we got it and completed it, they'd be super happy, and then they would more likely fund the next one, which would be bigger. And that was always my experience.
Leah, that's a perfect segue to where we're going. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to start now thinking about final project reports and why they're important. And the first thing to say is these final reports are important because they tie you over to this continuing relationship with the funder. So Leah just said, first time you're establishing a relationship with the funder, you want to make it really easy for them to say yes, right? And that's because they don't know you. They don't know if you're going to do a great job with the project or whether it's going to be a flop. So here's kind of the way I see it. In blue are all the steps that we need for the first grant. We submit it, we wait way too long, and then here it's awarded. Then we have to manage the grant, and then we write a final report. So we're tracking all of these steps, and every foundation has a file for us. And they're actually keeping all the grants that we submit to them, whether they're awarded. And then they're also keeping our final report. And every time they give us another grant, more information goes into our file. So this final report is so important because they've already said, we're going to trust you with our money. And then what did you actually do with our money is one of the things you answer in your final report. And the other thing you can answer is, how does it tie to what you want to do next? Right? So the nice thing about the final reports is usually they're fairly open-ended, and they almost always give you a chance to share extra information about the project. So that's a great chance to hint at what you might be coming back to them for next time. Okay, so I've got some tips on project reports, and I'll go through this, Leah, and then I'll see if you have any other information to add. So most final reports ask for something called a budget versus actual. So the budget is what you think things are going to cost and the money that you think you're going to bring in to do the project. The actual is the accounting or bookkeeping of what it actually costs. And so your plans can really change, and the actual cost might be very different than the budget costs. I'm going to show you a budget to actual document in just a minute, and we'll talk a little more about that. So also in the final report, what's important to remember is when you send in the final report, they're not going to take the time to go read your grant again to remember what you said you were going to do. So usually they ask you to remind us again what you said you were going to do. What were your goals? What were your outcomes? And then they ask you to tell if you actually got to the goals that you thought you were going to go to. So remember, retell them the story and then tell them what actually happened. here's what we thought we were going to do. Here's what actually happened. And then they'll ask, what were the challenges that you faced, or what was particularly successful? To me, project reports, they always come alive when you can use photos. And if you use photos, if you're doing a capital project where you're building something, make sure you stick people in them. So if you're insulating a building and you've got a picture of the insulation, have your staff or maybe your board members show up and do a great group photo of everybody having fun, or giving the thumbs up on a job well done, or volunteers that are working with you. So the photos, you can actually write a report and submit it using an online upload system. And almost always they'll allow you to attach extra documents. And the extra documents is where you can upload those photos. Now go back to something that we were talking about during the first session, how when you get a grant, you're really helping the foundation do its mission. So those photos that you're sending them are demonstrating to them visually that you're helping complete their mission. And the best thing that could possibly happen is that photos from your grant project end up in their annual report. And I see that happen over and over again. So if you've got a great project that you just gotten done, show it off and give them the tools they need to continue to show it off for your organization. And then, like I said before, you submit that report. That might be a great time to ask for a conversation with the program officer that you worked with and talk about the next things that you're working on, and get advice from them on, what strategic changes might be in their future. Okay, so that's my advice. Leah, got anything to add?
I have two things to add. One is I encourage you to make sure that you get your grant report in on time, because what you're doing is setting it up for whenever the next cycle you're allowed to apply again. A lot of times it's 2 years. That you're in good standing with them, because you did all the things you said you were going to do, and then you turned your report in on time, and they're going to remember that when you go to apply again. And the other thing I wanted to say is, if for some reason, and if maybe you already covered this, Meredith, that you really need to change something about your project midstream, the foundations are really understanding about that. They know that you don't have a crystal ball. So the best thing to do is to contact whatever method that they have told you that they prefer. Contact your foundation grant monitor and talk to them about it. They're usually really, actually every time I've ever done it, they've been super understanding and really glad that I called. So yep. Those two things.
And so asking for an extension is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And it happens all the time. It's a great chance to check in with the program officer. So let me ask you this question, Leah. What happens if your grant doesn't show up on time, or if you don't submit one at all?
Well, if you read your grant agreement that you signed, it sometimes in there will tell you what will happen if you don't do those things. They could actually ask for the money back. And they surely would think twice about ever funding you again, especially if you never sent in a report. You can just know that it's very likely that they wouldn't fund you again. If you're super late, or even, moderately late, but you don't let them know ahead of time, they're going to think you're not trustworthy, and they're going to think twice about funding you again.
Okay, well, what happens if if that was when somebody else was the executive director and I'm the new executive director and I don't really know what history they have with the foundation.
Yeah, so good. That's a really good point, because in those situations, the foundations are usually very understanding, because they know how transitions happen and things shift and how hard it is for the next person to sort of pick up the pieces. They do know that. So as soon as you sort of figure out that, oh, I've got a grant here from XYZ Foundation that never got finished, and the final report was done a month ago, reach out to them, explain the situation, and you'll be fine. They're really understanding about that.
Yep. And if there's a foundation that is new to you, but might not be new to the organization, it's always good to check in and see if there's an account that you need to change the contact information for and the username and password. And also ask if there's anything that didn't get submitted for your grant files. There's one particular funder I remember I have in mind who didn't advertise that the reports hadn't been done. They just never gave us grants. So after submitting 2 grants and getting a no, I finally asked, hey, what's going on here? And they said, well, 6 years ago, you didn't submit a report. So I had no way of knowing unless you kind of follow up and ask. I also suggest, of course, anytime you don't get a grant, that you follow up with a program officer and just ask for information about how you can do better the next time. You can often get really good advice when you do that. Okay, all right, so that's a final project report kind of advice. This is a file that I sent you. It's called the budget to actual file. And what it's showing is in green is we've got expenses on the top, what we thought the project would cost, and then in orange, what it actually cost. And down below, it's what money we thought we would take in, and then what money we actually took in. So you can tell the budget because we don't go out to the decimal point, and so we don't. But the actual is down to the penny if we know that information. Now, this brings up a couple of really important pieces about your project. There's a problem if you say you're going to spend $20,000 of a funder's money and you end up only spending $19,950 because they can't close the grant project on their side because there's still $50 that are unaccounted for that you didn't tell them how you spent it. So when you get a grant, even though we're used to feeling like we never have any money, I tell myself that money is spent, and the best thing I can do is spend it as quickly as possible and spend it fully. So if I get a grant for a project that's $20,000, I want to make sure I go just over $20,000 so that it's very clear that I spent all of their money. Any questions about that? So I'm going to ask the class, not Leah this time. Well, what happens if things just are cheaper than you thought, or you got somebody to do in kind? What should you do in that case? Any ideas?
Ask the funder if you can use the funds for a related project.
That's a perfect answer. So I say I always have plan B in my pocket. So if something is going to cost less, then what more could we do? And what do we need to do to get permission for that? Doing more, the funders are usually very happy with. And most of them don't want their money back. It's much easier for them and their accounting if you spend it all. Any other comments about that, Leah?
I would just reiterate what you said. That's so true. And I've actually had that happen. And they usually like it to be somewhat related to the project rather than completely like something else. So have that in the back of your mind as what other things could I add to the project that would make it cooler if I had more money, in case you do get some really great deals. And I've had folks like contractors, local businesses give discounts, which made the project cost less. And then I did have more money. So I just made sure that I had all that stuff in my back pocket.
Great, great. So the best message you can send to the funders is, oh my gosh, we're really grateful for your money. We really needed it, and we're going to spend it really fast. We're going to get our projects done on time. We're going to get our reports into you, because that demonstrates we really needed it and we were ready to do that work. The kind of holding on to that money and having it be really late, that's okay, because there are a lot of times that things come up and you have to change plans, but it's not sending the message that you needed the funds right away and that you were ready to do the project. So over time, you want to make sure that that you really are, that you're as close to schedule as you could be. Okay, so there's the budget to actual. You have that as a file. I also sent a copy of a really fun project I did in my community in Yachats. We added this long community skate park for kids, and we did a mural on it. And it was a really fun community project that was mostly done by volunteers. And so I created this final report, and notice I'm showing people in all of the pictures. And it was an online submission, but then I went ahead and sent the whole report in a more readable form with pictures so they could enjoy it at their leisure. This is also something that would be great to go in your newsletter. And I'm just going to point out, here I am, and this young man who turned 25 yesterday is my son. So you notice that the pictures really kind of, with people, really help. It kind of gives the reader a sense that your organization is alive. And sometimes I realize you have privacy issues with clients, but using your staff or community volunteers that are helping is a great thing to do with reports. Okay. So that's my little blurb on reports. Anything else to add from others? Questions or experience?
I just wanted to add that there are some grants that don't, like, they want to know what you're going to use it for, but they don't ask you to break down like exact numbers. And for the ones that are like that, like the one I did on Monday, I've learned, because I don't want to go back any more than I ever have to like make amendments or change things. So I've just written into pretty much every grant like that this is the project with shelter that we're working on, but the purpose of the shelter is direct services and emergency needs for clients. So we also are going to put a portion of that in that. So then I never have to go back and amend, because anything that's left over can just go to clients. And so I've saved a lot of time in the last year alone, just not being able to just use the leftover for services, because that's the thing we always can spend.
Terrific. Xander, what do you have to add?
So I was wondering about what happens if, things don't cost as much, you get in kind. What if prices are rising, or if costs are higher than you expected? And so maybe you're not going to do as much as you had said in the grant proposal because, it turns out the price on this particular product. There's a huge run on it this year, or something like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of called budget variance. You know, when do you need to check into with the foundation? How much change does there have to be in the budget before you need to let them know? So it depends really on the foundation that you're working with. I think over communicating is never a bad thing. Once you're actually doing the work to get permissions, if you're talking about a state program, then they will actually let you know that if you're 5% out of budget variance or some number, that you need to let them know and submit an amended budget. So it's really case by case. But it's not, you know, as you get better at managing these grants, it's not scary. It's just becomes an ordinary thing that you have to do when things change. Okay.
Could I
Now-
add one thing to that, Meredith?
Sure.
One step that I would take before I went back to the funder to let them know that it would cost more is I upped my game on trying to get discounts. And then as a last resort, I'd go back to the funder.
Okay. So what happens if you spend less money, there's money left over, do you have to give it back? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
So are you saying without contacting the funder to ask if there's, you know, hey, we had $2,000 left over from our playground project, but we're looking at replacing all the floors in our shelter.
So that
You
would be great. That would be plan B out of your pocket, is we've got more work we can do with your funds. Is that okay? That's a great plan to start with that. But maybe there's nothing else that you can think of, or maybe there are actually cases when funders need you to submit in writing what the change is that you want to make or what the addition is, and they will either approve it or not. And so the contracts are really important. There are funders that say, if you have funds left over, we do want them back. Or you may write and ask us for permission to use the funds for something else, but we reserve the right to deny that. So those contract documents should have all of those details. And if they don't, then, you know, talking to your program officer about that is absolutely the way to go. Okay. So the final advice for final projects: take the time you need to write a great report. I think it's better to submit a great report late than a poor report on time. Especially if you've talked to the program officer and kind of let them know you're working on it, it's going to be done, I need 3 extra days, they'll be fine with that. Here's the other thing. Before you get started on that grant, make sure everybody knows who's responsible for the report, who's going to be writing it, because they're going to need to be collecting information about the project, taking photos, and they need to know that before they get started so they're prepared for it. The next thing, make sure that the bookkeeper at your organization knows what the grant is, that all the expenses need to be coded to that grant. So at the end, they can come up with an actual chart that includes just the grant expenses. So at the beginning of every grant project, we have kind of a grants agreement meeting where we establish who's in charge of the report, what does the bookkeeper need to know, especially about what staff members might be paid for from this grant, how much admin are we going to take, stuff like that. And so then we're all on the same track. And then the last one, ask for an extension if you need more time. That happens from time to time for all of us. Okay. That's final projects. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is another really important relationship with foundations, and those are site visits. So you think of site visits, and what comes to mind? It's the first thing that pops into your mind.
Usually a few people from the foundation, they have a committee, they'll come out, ask questions, see your facility, look at where you're doing the project. Yeah, that's been my experience.
Okay, and there was no scary there. Have they been a good experience?
I didn't say it wasn't scary. You know, you're asking someone for money. That's always, yeah. No, it was a good experience. It went perfectly fine. It was, yeah, it all went really good.
Okay, great. So I'm sharing an article about site visits that I think is very helpful to have you understand what the funders are looking for and kind of how to coordinate them to get the funders the information that they need and to make them go as smoothly as possible. So I'll just let you read that at your own time. I brought back our pieces of the grant timeline again to point out that site visits usually happen after your grant is submitted and before they make awards. So usually site visits are great news that you've made it to the finals, right? But there are other times when you get grants from the state or feds where they will actually come and do a site visit while you're managing the grant. And it feels a little bit more like an audit, but it's the same type of thing. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? Do you have the capacity to do this? What systems in place do you have to support this work? So they can come at any time. So we heard from Rhonda about her experience. If you were going to give Rhonda or others, if you were going to give other people advice about site visits, what would it be? Got any more advice, Rhonda?
I guess just relax, you know, I mean, don't overthink it, you know, let them ask questions, be honest, transparent. Yeah, I think it just really helped to build the relationship. And then, you know, they did a check-in about midway through our project, and then, you know, we did our final reports and stuff. But no, it was good. It did help, I think, make me feel more confident in the direction we were going, that they saw, you know, that it was a legit project, that this is really where we were.
Okay. Somebody else who's had experience with site visits, how did they go and what advice would you give?
This is Perla.
Yeah.
I would say that, like, I think it's great when you are in the reports, right? Like, you're kind of gloating about like all the work that was done, how excited you are, but it's different when you're doing it in person. Like, it's hard to express excitement in the report because there's depending on the grant funder, oftentimes they're just very focused on like more of the data and numbers. And so getting to do it in person, especially if the funding like was for the purpose of like building a specific program, or like, you know, anything that was more like things that you can actually, like, tangible things that you could see, like, you know, in building something new within the building that you're at, renovating things just structurally, and showing people what their money went towards, and, you know, kind of just showing that excitement, letting them talk to other staff and how excited they were about receiving the funding and all of the things that they've been able to do with that. Oftentimes, like, you can see it in the grant funders, right? It's because it's tangible versus we're in the report, you're just reading it.
Yeah.
And so you're able to kind of share that excitement that like yourself and the staff have about what the money has done for your organization. And oftentimes, depending on like privacy and stuff, you know, it's helpful to, if there are people there who have benefited from it, that is not necessarily the staff, but like actual people that you're helping in the community, and seeing like maybe some of the things that they've done through that project can be really helpful as well.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? Experience learned from site visits. Yeah, Carly.
Yeah, we've been on the other side of site visits a couple of times, helping CVSSD and some other organizations conduct site visits. And one of the things that stuck out to me the most when we were coordinating them was that folks would really get, I think some folks said like, relax, like don't overthink it, don't overstress. But we had a lot of folks that would get so anxious that they wouldn't ask questions about what might the site visit look like, or one of our materials wasn't clear and they didn't ask a question about that. There's often, at least from our lens, there was a lot of flexibility to make that site visit as meaningful for both the funders and the sites as possible. And so I just really encourage folks to ask questions ahead of time and when the funder is there. At least from our experience, it was really exciting and enriching when folks felt the freedom to do that. And so if you think that that might be something you have room to do, ask questions ahead of time to make sure that your whole team is comfortable and confident with the process. I think it really makes a big difference.
Carly, you brought up a couple of really good points. So what you're really going for at these site visits are discussions about your organization and kind of showing not just your passion, but your excitement, your capacity and your excitement about this particular project. And most people that volunteer or on staff to do site visits really love the process of meeting with organizations and talking with them about their work. So the site visitors often have a lot of knowledge and experience with grant projects. So they're really great sources of, they're great resources, and they love to be asked questions about what they think or what suggestions they have. So the more that you can get them talking about their thoughts about your organization, the better. So the other thing that I think Carly brought up is there's actually real planning involved in setting up site visits. And I agree with that more, because I believe if you have a team that has reviewed what the questions are that you're going to be asked, and kind of some coordination on who's going to cover what sections, that will actually help everybody relax because you feel like you're prepared and ready, and it will end up having your site visits be more successful. So I actually, Carly said you can ask for questions. You can ask questions when you're there. And what I've done is I've actually created a list of common site visit questions. I didn't create it, I just borrowed it from somebody else. And when I have my in-person classes, we actually have an activity where we ask people to respond randomly to these questions for your projects. So these are common questions. They're basically just, they're asking you about different pieces of probably what went in your grant proposal, but it gives you a chance to answer them in person and show your knowledge and your passion about what you're doing. So back when I was writing grants for a school district, we had a lot of site visits. We had a grant writing site visit team, and we picked people that would not talk over each other. We always had a financial person. We had, the point person on the project. The superintendent would show up, and then me, the grant writer, and maybe a school board member. So what we got really used to is working as a team, and the superintendent would actually be the quarterback for these site visits. And that meant that each question nobody would answer. He would respond to every question and say, okay, I'm going to let Perla take that question because she's prepared for that question. Or Xander, I'm going to let you take this financial question. So it was kind of really orchestrated, but we all knew our roles. There were times where they wanted to ask to have us just answer off the cuff, but it meant that we all were prepared, and that meant we didn't need to be anxious about it. So I really suggest that you have the people that aren't going to over talk or get so nervous that they won't be able to talk in public, and that you make sure you have a financial person there, and that financial person is prepped. Everybody's prepped on what the grant is. We actually would meet ahead of every site visit and do a run through where we'd ask each of these questions, and each of us would have the assigned questions to respond to. And you know how the first time you answer something, it can come out really awkward and you wish you had a redo? So that practice was our chance to be really awkward and then take notes and go back and prepare what we wish we could have done. So that may sound like over-structured and overkill, but we were really successful when it came to the site visits. The other piece of advice I would say is the organizations that are the most confident spend their time talking about their challenges and what they're not doing well, because they want to get better and they're not embarrassed that they're a learning organization. So when reviewers are listening, the organizations that only want to put the best spin on everything are actually kind of the more immature organizations. The ones that are really ready to talk about how difficult it is to do this work, and that can lean into their need statement and admit what they don't know yet, they really come across as high-performing organizations. Leah, anything to add to that?
What came to my mind was I have also done site visits with DHS on the fund advisory board, where you go out with the funder as a advisory board member. And so if you ever get one of those or something like that, really it's an opportunity for the funder to sort of get a better feel for your organization, and they want to be able to find things to fund for you. So so don't try to hide your organization's flaws, like, that creaky door in the closet or whatever it might be. Don't try to hide it, because they're sort of really looking for, in the back of their mind, things that they want to fund.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions or thoughts about that? It's hard for site visits not to be scary, but feeling like you can do the planning work ahead of time makes you feel less like you're taking a chance and you're going into this blind.
If I could say one more thing, Meredith, is if anybody has a site visit scheduled and they want to have a conversation around it, feel free to give me or Hillary a call at the coalition. We'd be happy to provide you whatever kind of support you need around that. Like
a practice interview.
Yeah, we could totally do that.
Yeah, and you could use these site visit questions, or there might be specific questions for DV organizations, it would be more appropriate. Terrific.
And sometimes they do send those questions ahead of time. You're right.
Yep. Strongly suggest that you take Leah up on that. Okay. The last thing I want to get to today is a conversation about evaluation theory. And in the grant writing world, this is, I don't want to say it's an advanced topic, but it comes after telling your project story, the project description, and the needs statement. It's how do you design your programs so that they do what you want them to do? And then how do you measure that? I've got a book. It's shown here, and here's my personal spiral bound copy that I used. I took the best training I've ever taken was done by someone. They ran the food systems at Oregon State University, and they did this training from this book about how to design and measure program outcomes. This book is no longer in print, but I've got a PDF file of it, and I'm going to ask Leah to send that out in the next couple of days. And the reason that that's important is when you're talking about evaluation, there's a lot of lingo, and sometimes that lingo changes from person to person, you know, from evaluation person to evaluation person. So the way that I'm going to describe this language comes right from this book, and it's actually a pretty easy to read book, especially when funders are asking you for outputs or outcomes and you don't understand what the difference is. You can go to this book and they will help. It will help. Okay, so why evaluation? What's evaluation important for? If I ask that question, then we know from the next slide is thinking about it internally. It's so that the programs that we're doing, so that we know how to do them better and that we can keep reaching people in more meaningful ways. We're better at the work that we're doing. We're getting closer to our mission. The other reason that we need to know about it is more aligned with grant writing, and that's so we can show everybody else what we did, right? We're proud of our work. Here's what we created. Like Amber was talking about with her before and after pictures that's going to be turned into a funding campaign. So there are internal reasons and external. Now, in this slide, I've got a picture of dinosaurs in the bottom because evaluation theory has changed a lot. 30 years ago, the way that we measured our programs and how successful they were is really different than how we're being asked to do it now. So back in the days of the dinosaurs, 30 years ago, when some of us were doing program work, you'd measure stuff like how much money did you spend? How many people did you serve? And did they like what you did? These are all important measures, but they don't actually talk about the happily ever after or the impacts of what's happened to these people. They only talk about the treatments that they were given. So how much money did we spend on them? How many showed up? Were they happy? So now we have the burden of actually having to show what the impacts are. And so that's kind of the dawn of this new evaluation theory. So I showed this before, but we're going to use it to ground ourselves in where we're going. So over on the left, we have an unacceptable condition. And here it looks like it's an elderly woman who is isolated and maybe lonely. So if we were an organization working with her, we would apply some kind of treatment, and we would have an impact by changing her behavior from the unacceptable condition to something that was much more positive, socially engaged, happy, increased well-being. The treatments are the activities that we used, and the impact is how is she changed? Okay. So now let's go back to the dinosaur days. What we used to measure if we were doing an after-school learning program was the amount of money spent. So we spent $125 on each child. Well, that's important for learning how we do that again, but that's not an impact. What might an impact be for an after-school learning program? What do we really want to know here?
Like attendees bettered their grades or something like that.
Yeah, and or maybe we're moved on to the next grade level because their scores improved so much, right? So that's exactly right. The treatment is the learning program. The impact is higher scores, more confident kids. Okay, let's do another one. So the treatment is 60 adults attended free eye screenings. That's great, but what's the impact? What do we really want to know? There could be more than one impact.
So maybe like how many new pairs of glasses you gave out, or how many eye conditions were observed, how many treatments were offered.
Yes, exactly. So 60 adults attended the free eye screenings, and as a result, 10 of them were diagnosed with glaucoma, and another 20 of them were diagnosed with the need for additional corrective vision. Perfect. Okay, let's do one more. This one on client satisfaction. So if we said 90% of participants said they really liked the EMT training course, that's great that they liked it, but that's not an impact either. That's a feeling they have. What do we really want to know about these participants that took the EMT training course?
Increase in knowledge.
Yeah, what did they learn? And maybe not only what did they learn, but what did they do with that knowledge? Did they go on to be EMTs? Right? Did they save any lives? Right? Perfect. So we did that to kind of help us get more flexible with the difference between the treatment and the outcome. And so I'm going to show our ladder again that we introduced in session 2. And what I'm going to say is it's actually a little bit more complicated than I led on in session 2. So we have these tiers of the ladders that we're saying give you more and more valuable hierarchies of effects. But really, what I'm doing is showing at what level do we actually get to what we call outcomes or changes in behavior or changes in the environment. So the first, whether they participated or not, that's an important measure to have. or whether they liked what you did, that's an important measure to have, but they're not outcomes. Those are something called outputs that we'll talk about in just a minute. The outcomes are, what did we learn? How did it change our behavior? And then how did it change our community or the economy or the environment? Okay. So that was kind of unpacking some terms. And now we're going to think about using these terms to design a new program and to measure the impact of that program. So the first thing we want to do when we develop a program is to think about, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Why are we doing this program? And let's use an example of the problem is we live in a community and there are a bunch of kids that are really struggling from poor dental health in our communities. So we want to create a program that's going to change that, okay? So we've got the problem identified, and the next thing we want to do is look at what our future vision is. The problem is they've got bad dental health. What are we hoping to achieve? So what's our vision for these kiddos? Well, one of the things we could say is we'd like to change their behaviors. We'd like more of them brushing more consistently. That's not the only outcome we could pick, but let's choose that one. So what we've just done is something called backcasting. And that is you begin in the present and you look at the problem that's happening, and then you jump into the future and you say, what do I want for the future? And then you step backwards to develop a pathway to get you from the present to the future. That's how you design your program. You move step by step towards that future vision. And that's why they say that if you don't have that future vision, then you don't know how to design a program. There's nothing that you're trying to get to. So what's really important is that we have the problem, bad dental hygiene, and now we have our goal, more children brushing. So the next thing we need to do now is to step back and develop treatment ideas that are going to get us to our outcome. So what are some ideas? What should we do? Well, let's say we're new at this and we say, well, here's our program design. We're going to give out toothbrushes, and maybe that's all we need to do. Let's give out toothbrushes and see if that helps. So now we have a program design. We've created a model for our program, and now we need to test it. We need to test our program model to see if it works. This is what we think. Let's see. So we're going to hand out the toothbrushes, and we're going to see if there really is a change in brushing habits. So we do that, bring in an evaluator, and the evaluator asks, have you been brushing more? And the children say, no, we use the toothbrushes for an art project. So what happened there? What happened?
There wasn't any skill building or education on it?
Yeah, that was a really lousy program design, wasn't it? Who would think that that was going to work, right? But that was our first attempt. So let's see if we can do a better job, right? So if you now were saying do better than that first model, what would you add? And would you repeat what you said before? I heard.
There was no skill building or education on brushing your teeth.
Okay, what would you do for skill building?
Teach kids how to brush their teeth.
Okay. And education?
Teach them about dental hygiene as a whole, maybe.
Okay, love it. All right, I like those. So exactly right. Let's give them the toothbrushes. Let's teach not just the kids, but let's also teach their parents. And then let's do some follow-up checks and provide encouragement. Okay, great. I think what we've got here is a better program design, right? We used the feedback from our first trial, and now we've created a better design. Okay, we've got what we think is a better design, but now we've got to figure out if this program design is working. If we do all these things, are we really going to get more children to brush? So we need some way to measure the before and after, or what we're going to do to measure our program design. So what do you think? What should we do? Here's our program design. If we do these 3 things, we'll get to more children brushing. What do you think we should do to measure this?
Follow up with the number of kids that are like less cavities.
Okay, so we could actually go to their doctors and ask for the exam records. That might be a problem with HIPAA, and that might take a long time to get to. But I love the idea. What else could we do? Maybe that would be a little shorter term and maybe less costly.
There could be pre and post surveys, like just question.
Yeah. And who would you ask? The kids or the parents?
I would do both.
Okay, love it. What else could you do? Any other ideas?
Getting surveys back can be hard sometimes. And so I'd probably spin it a little bit that similar to how like libraries often do summer reading things where there's like a chart that they did, you know, they had to put a sticker on every day that they brushed, and they could turn that in at the end of the, you know, week or month or whatever. And that would, you know, they got entered into a drawing or something like that, or they earned so many, whatever, fill in the blank. But that would actually get the feedback back. They're in it because there's a reward, but you're actually getting the data that you need.
That's a perfect response. And so now what you're seeing in this program design is we not only have to come up with the different treatment options, but we also have to come up with the different evaluation options and which ones are going to work for us. So you guys got every single one. Here's our program model. So we could do a parental or a kid's survey about their brushing habits. We could do the child checkoff calendar, or we could actually, if we really wanted to be scientific about this, go and use the dental exam records. Great. So now we've brainstormed the tools we could use. Let's choose something practical. And actually, let's choose 2 of them. So now we've got our program design, we've got our evaluation tools, and we're ready to try this out. So let's see how it works. So when we've got our program model, now we're going to actually convert it into the language that they talk about in the measuring program outcomes model. Inputs are the resources that we bring into the system. So in our case, it's not just the toothbrushes and children, but we had parents that are going to be involved. We have the educators that are going to be involved, and we have whatever evaluation tools we're going to use. So they're all the resources that we're bringing to the table. The activities are the treatments that we do. So we're going to hand out toothbrushes, we're going to do education, we're going to do follow-up checks and encouragement, and we're also going to do the surveys and the checkoff calendars. The next term is outputs. Outputs are how many people have actually received the treatments that you've given. So it's before they've been changed, but it tells you how many people completed the treatment that you gave. So it might be 200 children received toothbrushes. Of those children, 185 of them were there for the education piece, and maybe only 160 of them actually completed the checkoff calendars. So it actually kind of tells you how many people are still involved in your program model as you go by, and how many people completed the measurements. Okay? And then the outcomes, that becomes what's the goal that you were going for? And what was our outcome again? In this case, for our program model?
To get more children to brush.
More increased children brushing. That's all we were going for. We weren't even going for, better dental health. We were just trying to show that they're brushing more. Okay? And so we've got our program model and our evaluation tools, and we can go through and measure that. So then the last part becomes by how much. Yes, it's important. We know what our outcome is, but it would be more meaningful if we can actually quantify by how much. And so then we talk not just about outcomes, but about measurable outcomes. And so if on your grant application, they ask for measurable outcomes, then you have to give some kind of number of how much more you're talking about. So did the brushing increase by 15%? Or did it increase by 100%? So here's our final logic model, and that is we have our inputs, the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes. And an example of a measurable outcome was we did this one-day education piece with follow-up over the next 2 weeks. And after that 2-week period, we used our checkoff calendar and our parental survey to measure the increase in brushing. The result, what we found out, was that there was a 20 to 30% increase in the number of children who brushed their teeth twice a day at Jonesville Elementary School, as measured by our two tools. So now we've got the program design, the measurement tools, and we've done the measurement. What's next?
Put it all together.
We've just put it all together and we've gotten our results. Now we're going to go back and say, well, we got to 20 to 30%, but didn't we tell the funder that we would hit 40%? And we didn't get there. So now we need to go back and think about how can we change our activities? Maybe we need to do this longer. Maybe we need to add another fun activity that motivates kids more. Or maybe we need to work more with the parents and explain more about what we're doing. So we can change our program model, or maybe our measurement tools weren't as good at measuring what we were trying to measure as we thought. So maybe we need to change our measurement tools. So it becomes really creative. How do you design your programs? What's the right tools? And then what are your results when you try it out? That's what evaluation work does. Kind of cool? What are your thoughts right now? Sound scary? Sound hard? Sound fun? Sounds like what you already do? Here's what I'll say. It's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and I really enjoy working jigsaw puzzles with other people. So brainstorming these ideas of what you're going to change, it's a little hard to think of ideas just yourself, but if you're getting feedback from somebody else, it can be really helpful. So I think creating these evaluation tools and evaluation matrix is really helpful if you've got more than one person working on it. So here's the summary. The first thing you do is you identify and you try and define a problem. The next thing is you look into the future and say, what are we trying to get to? And then you work your way back and you create treatments or activities that you think you will get your clients to that outcome. Step 4 is you create the evaluation tools to measure it. And then step 5 is you do your test run or your pilot. And so if you're writing a grant, you actually might include all of these steps in your project charter as designing that program system. That's if you're writing a grant that includes program design. Other times, they will have expected that you've already done that work and that you're presenting your program model and what the evaluation tools are going to be as part of the grant application. Okay, I'm going to take a pause there and ask for questions. Or Leah, any input you might want to offer? Have you ever done this, Leah?
Oh, yes, yes. With
You do it all the time, don't
all
you?
the time. And I'm going to make it a real world thing right here, right now, because this class was funded by a foundation, and that means that there's an evaluation process. And in the chat box is a link to a SurveyMonkey for the evaluation for this class. The deadline for you to do the evaluation is March 14th. My hook is always to offer something free. So because the evaluations are anonymous, so you can say whatever you want, you'll have to email me that you have done the survey, and then I will enter you into a contest and for a drawing. And if your name is drawn, I'll get a hold of you and we will talk about how to get your surprise item to you.
Your fabulous prizes?
Yes, fabulous prizes.
Awesome. Okay, so actually that might be helpful to think of this program as a program model and the evaluation tools we're using. Before we do that, I'm going to share one more piece. This is a term that you see a lot with programs, the logic model. And what I want you to know is we've actually been talking about a logic model this whole time. So I'm going to show you some examples of logic models. And what you'll see is we now have the terminology for those very terms. The inputs, these are the resources that you need to have. In this case, they've actually are calling the outputs kind of what the activities are. So they've skipped the activity section. Everybody uses different terminology, but they're saying is how many people got through the activities, who was involved, and what happened. The outcomes in this logic model, ST stands for short term, MT is midterm, and LT is long term. So they're actually asking you for 3 different outcomes in this logic model. Now, how do you know what's right and what to put down for each of these? You start with a brainstorm, and then for your first round, it's really a guess. What makes sense to you? Okay. Here's another a version of a logic model, and I want you to see that it's really similar. So in this case, what I really like is they start with the problem. What's the situation? What are the symptoms and problems? And then the inputs are the investments, what you're bringing to the table. Here, they've got both the activities and the participants, what happens to them, and they're calling those outputs. That's fine. And then outcomes again, or impacts, and again, they have short term, which they're calling the learning ones, midterm, which are the actions or behaviors, and long term are those social and economic environmental changes. Pretty cool? Now, if you wanted to add a couple of other things, these first two parts, those are what we call the assumptions. These are the program designs, and then the outcomes they're calling external factors of what's going to happen outside of the program that you've designed. Okay. Here's one final version of it, and this is actually like the ones, this is most like the ones that I've had to do in the past, where you have a bunch of boxes, and what you find when you're doing these logic models is you run out of paper size really big, because there are a lot of things that you can think of. You keep adding inputs and activities as you go along. And then when you start thinking of the benefits or the impacts, you can go on and on about the different possibilities for increases in learning, in actions, or in the environment and society. Kind of cool? So if you get the chance to do this, this is another time where Leah has a lot of experience with this. It's going to take some time, but she can help you find a template online to create a logic model that makes sense for what you're trying to do. Or sometimes the grant funders will give you a template of their own and ask you to work on it. So today we're just kind of doing a taste of what that would look like. That your actual first time one through this, I think getting some coaching is helpful, because you want it to be fun. And I think, either Leah or I hope could make it a pretty fun process. Any comments about that, Leah?
I suspect that the group who isn't experienced with writing grants is having a hard time remembering the difference of when you put outputs and where, and when you put outcomes and where. Is that true, folks? Do you have a hard time sort of remembering which one goes where? I have a little cheat for that. And my little cheat is the letter C stands for change, and only outcomes has the letter C in it, because the outcomes are about change.
Yes, and outputs has P for participants.
I like it. I didn't even think of that.
What did the participants complete? Because a lot of times the output is used to let you know slippage. We started with 25 people. In this grant writing class, we started with 50 people, but we've lost a lot of people, right? So one question Leah and I might have is, how can we keep more people still attending the class? And I think one of the things we would jump to quickly is, well, we could go back to in-person classes, because those are more engaging. Okay, so that's a logic model. And I think we're gonna skip the talking about the class and how we would measure it, because Leah just shared she's going to send you the evaluation for the class, and you'll know now why it's so important that we are measuring it, because we want to make changes to what we're doing so that we can better serve you. So that's the end of evaluation theory. I want to end kind of this part of it by having you each think about next steps. And if you're still working on a grant project, think about, what do I have left to do to get my grant proposal in? And what are the next few steps that I'm going to take to move that forward? If we can identify the steps, then the likelihood of them getting done will be much higher. So we're also going to go into a break, and we'll be joined by Deborah Vaughn when we get back from the Oregon Community Foundation. So it's 4:03 now. Let's come back at 4:13 and we'll get started. So Deb, what we'll share is that you may not be able to see everybody. So Leah and I will be monitoring for hands and the chat box. And we'd love, before you start, just to let people know, if they have questions, do you want them to ask as you're presenting, or do you want us to hold them till the end?
So the gift that I'm giving to myself and hopefully to you today is that this slideshow is 8 slides long. I tried to keep it really short. So I think what might be most helpful to me is if you have questions, put them in the chat. And then as soon as I get through the slides, which I've sent to Meredith as a PDF to share with all of you as well, as soon as I get to the end of the slides, I'll stop screen sharing so that I can put your videos up. And even if you're not in a space where you want to turn your video on today, at least then I'll be able to also see hands raised. So questions in the chat, and then let's loop back to those at the end. I don't want to talk the whole time.
Okay, and one last thing, Deb, there are several people on the call today, but Leah will also be sharing this with others who couldn't attend today. So
Great. That's fantastic. I think the last slide has my contact information, and I'll also make sure to put it in the chat. So if people watching the recording want to reach out and follow up, I'd be happy to hear from them.
Terrific. Well,
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Deb, I'll let you start a little bit by even talking about what your role is at OCF.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Meredith and Leah, and thank you all for welcoming me. I know you've been on this meeting for a while today, so I hope to bring some energy and conversation and support to you in your work. So my name is Deb Vaughn. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm really happy to be here and share some about the Oregon Community Foundation. So about me, my primary geographic focus at the foundation is the Northern Willamette Valley, which OCF defines as Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. I joined OCF's team about a year ago. Prior to that, I was with the Oregon Arts Commission for 13 years, also managing grant programs, but specifically related to arts education and arts and cultural programs. So not new to philanthropy, but still feeling relatively new to the broad and expansive work of the Community Foundation. My title with OCF is a regional program officer. So that means that in addition to being a regional knowledgeable champion for the counties that I primarily serve, I'm part of a statewide team that supports our community grants program, which I will talk a little bit about in this presentation. And I also support several corporate advised funds that provide competitive funding opportunities in and around the Portland Metro and Northern Willamette Valley region. And I define my job as being a liaison and a voice for nonprofits to the foundation. So I really see my role as a program officer being outward facing, so that I can listen and learn about the work and challenges and opportunities that nonprofits face, and then bring that perspective back into the foundation so that we can then respond to what we're learning from all of you. So after I talked to Meredith, who gave me a little bit of an overview of the work you've been doing together, I hope to provide you with some resources to apply to your work in grant making, leave time for questions at the end if you'd like to stay and have a conversation. So I'll do a quick introduction to OCF, touch on one of our primary grant programs, and then share some action steps that I hope that you can utilize. So the Oregon Community Foundation is essentially a nonprofit manager of charitable funds. Our endowment is comprised of thousands of funds that are created by individuals, by families, businesses, nonprofits, and government entities. Because we use that collaborative investment strategy, that means that we make grants and awards across numerous issue areas, and we have a wide variety of grant programs that all serve different purposes. The community grants program that I mentioned on the previous slide is our most open and broadly accessible competitive program. So I will give you a little bit more information into that in a moment. One of the important things to know about our community foundation is that one of our jobs is to help donors create funds to support their specific areas of interest. So sometimes that's a geographic region. Sometimes it's a particular topic. We have scholarship funds for certain profiles of students. Essentially, that list of opportunities is as long as our donors' potential interest. So our job is to represent the interests of those donors, just as you honor your donors' intent when they contribute to your organization. And sometimes there are restrictions on that, and sometimes they're unique and quirky. And we have about 2,000 of those. So what that means is that when we fold all of those different philanthropic visions into our work, what comes out is a complex structure that can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming, I think, to applicants. And so that's why our program officers are here, is to help you navigate some of that complexity. And I'll share some tools that hopefully can help smooth that. The other thing that happens because of that diversity of contributors to our funds is that most of our grant making every year is actually not through a competitive process like community grants. It's us managing our donors' intent. And so what this says to me is that this is actually really good news for all of you and your organizations, because we know that a lot of our donors care deeply about the issues of domestic violence, as well as the different geographic regions that you all support. So the first tool I'm going to share with you is actually one to help connect with our donors. So these donor advised funds are a really significant way that OCF supports communities. And this organizational profile tool helps you connect directly to them. So this tool provides you a way to update OCF staff and donors on things that you're working on, current needs that are coming up for you, and also the populations that you're serving. I want to be clear that it is not an application for funding. It is a communication tool, but it allows you to control the pace of communication and a great deal of the formatting of that. So when you log in to the URL at the bottom of this page, you'll see some fields where you can provide information like your mission statement, descriptive information about populations you're serving. And then I don't even know if it has a character count limit, listing of current projects and needs. So that's just a little hot tip that I've seen some very long responses in that current projects and needs section. So I don't know that I recommend that. Our donors probably would appreciate something a little bit more concise, but you have a great deal of flexibility in what you include in that information. So this is a relatively new tool. It's about 1.5 years old. And what we're learning is that profiles that are action-oriented and time-sensitive are received really well by our donors. So what I recommend is that once you establish this profile, is that you update it at least every 6 months. And you're certainly welcome to do so more frequently if significant events are occurring for your organization. And that could be something really wonderful that's happening, like, gosh, we just got this wonderful public investment and are now launching our capital campaign. Or it could be something really difficult, like I had an organization over the summer that had an incident of arson at their food pantry distribution site. And one of the first steps they did was update their profile and say, this happened. We had to shut down for a week, but we're back up and running, and here's how you can help. We need these things. So that is a tangible step that you can take to make your organization more visible, even if you're not yet feeling ready to actually apply for one of our grant programs. And when Meredith told me about the one-pager assignment that you're working on, I immediately thought that this tool could be a wonderful place for you to do just a little copy paste, a light adaptation of a lot of the information that you're including in that document. And that should give you some excellent starting language to build out your profile. And I should say those profiles feed into a database that is searchable by our donors. So a donor can on their own go in and search for who's doing this type of work in this type of region. And it kind of works like a matchmaking program. And our staff also get updates when those profiles are updated. So your communication is going to a couple different places there. Transitioning to our community grants program, this is our key statewide program. This year, 2022, we have just one application deadline, and that is at the end of the month on March 30th. What we're looking for are proposals that engage representatives of our priority populations in project planning, in project implementation, and in reaping the benefits of the work. So one of those priority populations is survivors of domestic violence and or child abuse. So I know that your organizations and your work is already well aligned with the main intent of this funding. That being said, it is a fairly robust application process. And so I would be happy to talk with you about kind of where you are in your program development, in your grant writing confidence, and find out if it's a good fit for you this year. But I do want to just briefly let you know the types of funding that we're offering in this program. Project support, which is either implementation of new work or expansion of existing work. So that's not to fund just your kind of ongoing business as usual. It is for something new. We have capacity building support, which is more focused internally on your organization, things that you need to develop, grow, stabilize yourself so that you can then provide greater service to your community. We do offer general operating support for culturally specific organizations or rural organizations with operating budgets below $250,000. So that's a little bit specific, but I mention it here because I wondered if some of your organizations might be in that position. That general operating support is essentially unrestricted, and you can use it to pay whatever expenses you need to run your organization. So that's a pretty exciting space that we have. And then finally, this year, we're bringing back capital support, specifically for projects with budgets under $500,000. So Meredith also mentioned in our earlier conversation that several of you are looking for support for some space renovations and expansion projects. So I wanted to mention that opportunity, but it does have that $500,000 cap. So it wouldn't be for an entirely new overhaul of a building, but if you're adding on or enhancing facilities, there might be an alignment there. And there is not a cap on the organizational budget size for capital projects, only the project itself. Okay, so in thinking about strong proposals and OCF's priorities, I want to just communicate that we don't want to imply that a competitive application has to hit every single one of our priorities perfectly. We don't expect that, and it's not what we intend. Also, just to know that generally when we review applications, we're not questioning whether a particular project is a good one. Pretty much everything we look at reflects good and important work. However, some of the applications we see are going to be more competitive than others. And so when we face the challenge of limited resources for more projects than we can fund, some of these factors are going to play a role in helping us make those difficult decisions. So in the community grants program this year, we will be prioritizing efforts that focus primarily on one or more of our priority populations, rather than one of those populations being among all of the people who are served. So again, this seems to me like a really strong place of alignment for the work of your organizations, and I wanted to highlight that today. We also are really emphasizing the importance of authentic engagement of people being served in developing the approach to that service that you're offering. Sometimes that's through direct engagement on a staff or a board level. Sometimes it's through volunteer engagement. Sometimes it's through community partnerships. There's a variety of different ways that an organization could successfully demonstrate that engagement. But the example that I often think of from my time working in education programs and philanthropy is an organization would call me and say, hey, we've got this great idea for this project that we want to do in schools. And so will you fund it? And I would say, well, did you ask the schools if they want that project? Because it's not easy to find time during the school day and develop those partnerships and get the relationship with the teacher that you need. So what I'm interested in is the projects where they call and say, you know, we've been talking to the schools, and what we've learned is that this is what is helpful to them, and here's how we're going to do it. And that's the kind of approach that OCF is looking for in really strong proposals in community grants. We also want to see a reasonably strong position for some sustainable community impact, which can include organization financials. We will ask for some financial information. That being said, we certainly recognize that these are really financially stressful times for a lot of nonprofit organizations. And so we're going to be working to balance our role as good stewards of the funds that we grant with the need to accept some financial risk to when addressing these community issues. And there is some narrative space in the application where you can share some of that nuance with us. We have a commitment to addressing inequality in our communities, particularly as it affects those priority populations. To that end, we are going to ask for some demographic information and ask that you share with us some of the intentional efforts that your organization is undertaking to advance DEI. We don't expect perfect answers. We don't expect every organization to have arrived, because in authentic EDI work, there isn't an arrival destination. It is an ongoing journey. So we are looking in our applications to invite you to share information with us about where you are on that journey. And finally, it is your organizations working with the people you serve who are the ones that define what positive and substantive change looks like. And we invite you to share that with us. So for follow-up next steps, another action item, in the OCF environment, you do not need to have a relationship with a program officer in order to apply for most of our grants. We really work to be open and accessible, and you're welcome to contact any of us with questions. But the best use of your time is going to be to connect with a staff member who specifically supports your region. So that's what I've listed here on this slide. Everybody is also on our website, and you can search for their name. So we recommend that you schedule with a program officer to see if there's a good fit before applying, especially if it's your first time in community grants. We don't want you to come up to the application and be so overwhelmed that you give up. We want to have a conversation with you ahead of time and help guide you through that process, so we can make sure it's a good fit. And I don't mean that in a screening sense. I really mean that in the most supportive way possible, so that you're using your time well. And sometimes a program officer can help you identify another fund that could be more supportive to your work. We also can provide some feedback on proposals after we've made our decision. So if you do decide to submit a proposal, and even if it does get funded, but especially if it doesn't, you can reach out afterwards, and the program officer can often give a little bit of context and feedback that might help you develop proposals in the future. And then finally, on the webpage that I've listed on this slide, we do have a recording available of a kind of a potential applicant orientation webinar. We post that as a professional development tool. So that is another resource that we have for you. So these are the 3 hopefully easy and doable action steps that you can take after this meeting, or after you have dinner, after you have a really good night's sleep and a weekend. You can create and or update that organization profile tool that I shared. You can schedule a meeting with a program officer to see if there's potential for community grants this cycle. And then the secret third option that I just threw on this last slide is that we do have a quarterly newsletter specifically targeted towards nonprofits to keep you up to date on what's happening at OCF, upcoming deadlines, and hopefully in the coming months, where OCF is going to be in person in the community and actually where you could meet a program officer easily in person. So that URL is where you can sign up for the newsletter. And we'd love to be able to, I know that's sort of a surface way to stay in touch, but we hope that that at least reminds you that we're here and what's coming up for us. That comes out quarterly. So we only do that 4 times a year, and hopefully that feels manageable. So I'll just put this slide up for a hot second so it gets on the recording and people can pause on it. But I will also put this information into the chat, and I am so excited to stop screen sharing and stop talking and see what questions you might have and how I can answer them.
I have a question. So you talked about the capital projects being 500,000. That's so you're looking at like total. So the reason I'm asking is we bought a new safe house and we funded that, but now we're doing an addition to the safe house. And I think it's right close to that 500,000 because in order to make it ADA compliant, we have to add on ADA rooms. So would that fall under that?
Yeah, if you could, I mean, I think my recommendation would be to frame up that portion, that add-on portion as the standalone capital project, right? So you would need to carve off the budget, right? And make the case for this specific portion of it. And if that comes in under 500,000, then that could be eligible to apply.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like Xander maybe has a hi.
So the profiles that are there is that for grantors, or can I look at the profiles of other organizations?
Oh, that's such a good question, and one I haven't had before. So I don't think that database is available. That interface is available for other nonprofits. If you're interested in becoming a donor with OCF, then we'll give you all the access. But at this time, those profiles are internal to OCF staff and to our donors that have access to that portal. That being said, Xander, if you are, if you're not sure kind of what to put into your profile, if that's feeling kind of uncertain, if you want to send me a draft, I could take a look at that, and I could at least let you know if that's lining up with generally what I'm seeing other organizations. So feel free to email me, kind of what your thoughts are, or send me your one pager maybe as a starting place. And I'd be happy to look at that.
To follow up on that, Deb, how do organizations know if an advised donor wants to fund them?
So sometimes they'll just get a check because we do have some donors who are pretty self-motivated and sometimes want to be very anonymous. Sometimes you might get a contact from a philanthropic advisor or donor relations officer from OCF that's wanting to get some more information about your organization, ask some questions on behalf of the donor. And sometimes a donor will get in touch with you directly, because the other thing about our donors is while they have funds with OCF, often they also invest directly and independently. And so they may see or hear about you through another venue, and they pick up the phone and call, or they drop an email. So we do try to encourage our donors to work through our donor relations officers so that they're not sort of overwhelming organizations. They get really excited about it. That's one of the services that we provide, but a variety of different ways.
Thanks.
I want to make sure, it looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat that I want to make sure. It looks like maybe Meredith posted. How is a general operating request different than program or project? Oh, how are the application questions different? So there are different application questions. I think they're basically the same for capacity, program, and capital. Operating support has a little bit different questions because it's more focused on the overall work of your organization, your mission as a whole, as opposed to carving out kind of a specific initiative or a specific direction. So that is why that general operating support is limited to specific categories and types of organizations, because we have identified that organizations that are rurally based with those smaller budgets or culturally specific are already in alignment with our priorities. So we don't need to get into the specifics of, what are your outcomes and who are you serving? We're more interested in how are you doing that? And I think that was the question. How is the request different?
Yep.
Then you've asked, are grants from one geographic region competing with grants from other regions, and how are they distributed by region? So OCF takes at the beginning of our process, which has a lot of steps in it internally, we do have kind of regional targets that we're looking for. And it's roughly, I think it's some combination of how many nonprofits are in the region, historically, how many applications we've received. So we start there, but we also have a statewide pool because we also receive applications that are statewide focused in terms of their impact, or a statewide focused organization in a particular region. So there's some nuance there. But then the other thing that happens is through the process of the community grants program, we are also sharing information about those applications with our donors. So what sometimes happens is a donor sees a proposal through that project, decides to contribute to it, which then frees up some of those funds to go to another place. So it fluctuates a bit, and essentially we try to keep the review process regionally focused. So what'll happen is I'll get the applications from Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties, and then those will be redistributed out to volunteer grant evaluators from Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. So we are trying to keep that regional community-based knowledge at the forefront of the process. It's not always a perfect system, but that is one of our priorities. So my work as a program officer and the work of those volunteers that live and work and care about the region are what we lead from.
I guess embedded in that question was, if you're down on the south coast of Oregon, who are you writing to? Are you writing to people in your community? Or are you writing to somebody in Portland?
That's exactly. Thank you for asking that, Meredith. And I should put that back into the slideshow. You are absolutely writing for community members who are not professional grant writers and not always professional grant readers. Although we do extensive training, we often have evaluators that work with, I shouldn't say evaluator because you just came through evaluation training today. It's taken me a minute to adjust too. Grant reviewers is maybe a easier to understand term. So we do have volunteer grant reviewers who work with us over the course of years and are pretty familiar with the program and have gotten a level of experience. But generally you are writing to a fellow community member who cares about investing philanthropic support in the work of organizations where they live. So hopefully that takes a little bit of the pressure off of it. And particularly if you're not writing for somebody in Portland that's never been to Coos Bay. Well, I'm happy to take any other questions. I also know that you've had a long afternoon. So Meredith, leave it to you to see where we go next. I put my email address and my phone number in the chat. So feel free to grab that. And also please feel free to reach out to any of my peer program officers that work directly with your region. If you reach out to me, I'll talk to you a little bit and then pretty quickly refer you because again, that regional focus is really important to us.
Well, I have to say, I love the actionable steps, that organizational profile. If you share that, you get credit for at least, no, it's not a grant, but for applying what you've learned to this class to an actual funder. So that really is relationship building. And then the checking in with the program officer, especially if you're going to go after that community grant. The grant is due March 30th. So the earlier in March you get to that check-in, the better. And I think you can get some really helpful information with that. And then the third step, let's see, who remembers what that one was?
Well, you didn't say there'd be a quiz. I was going to put it in the chat, but now I'm not gonna. It's late in the day. I'll paste it anyway. It was sign up for the in-community newsletter for nonprofits. Xander knew. Xander, you had it. Carly too.
And then if you're thinking about that community grant, you're going to have to go to the OCF website and create an account if your organization doesn't already have one. But Deb talked about that video, the guidance for people that are applying, and they'll actually go through all that on the video.
Yeah, and we have tech support available as well. So if you run into any weird hiccups, like, oh, somebody years ago created it and I don't know the password, we'll just get you to our grants management support team and they can help you work through that.
I was going to ask you a question, Deb, but you were so thorough. I don't actually have one for you other than one of the things when I was writing grants all the time, I did was make sure I kept a lookout for when foundations would have like these meet and greets in the community. And I know that the Oregon Community Foundation would have those in my community. I always made sure I went to those so that I could meet the folks and that they could, you know, have a conversation with the person who was running the program. And that kind of relationship building is so valuable.
Yes, so having started with the foundation last March when we were still working remotely, I've not gotten to do that yet, but I was just talking with my colleague, Jen, who works in our philanthropic services and donor relations, how excited we are to have an opening ceremony for our Salem office, which got set up and remodeled right before COVID. So no one has been here to visit. We want to do regional office hours around the region. So I know that many of us are just itching to get back out in person. So that in-community newsletter is where we'll start posting as soon as we are starting to move. We just started our kind of official return to the office a couple of weeks ago. So it's a bit gradual, but it's coming, and we're really looking forward to meeting and seeing all of you in person.
Thank you, Deb.
Well, thanks so much. And any last questions before we how about a virtual applause for Deb? Perla, did you have something you wanted to ask?
I do. Sorry, I've been on off my screen. I was trying to like stuff my face while I was listening to stuff. I do have one question. So we recently, like a lot of organizations, have had a lot of turnover at our agency, and so if the person who was in charge of kind of handling all the grants, keeping all of that information, did create an account, but we don't have the login access, would you be a good person to contact just to see if we already have an account and potentially get that set up or reset for a login?
You absolutely can contact me, but also let me just pull what will be best is to give you our tech support, and I will paste that in the chat for you and just drop them an email, let them know the situation, and they can check your account and get you set up. So yeah, I'll just put that right in the chat there. Absolutely. Yeah, we know that turnover and like who has the password, which email address did you use?
Yeah.
Yep, we'll help you with that. No problem. Plus we'll get our database updated with current contact information while we're at it. So it's a win-win situation.
Great, thank you.
And then Leah, could you remind everybody how they're going to get the link to the evaluation?
Yes. I did put it in the chat, but it's way up there. So I will put it in the chat again. So you follow the link to SurveyMonkey and you fill it out. It's anonymous. So that means that you'll need to email me that you have done the survey. I will put you in a drawing and I will randomly draw from it, and you will get a call from me or some way I'll communicate with you to get together with you about the item that you won.
Terrific. So I want to thank everybody for hanging in there. I want to let you know, Leah and I are both really looking forward to working with you to move your projects forward. And Deb, I am going to speak for her, is very excited about the thought of having new grant writers come in to the Oregon Community Foundation and to be able to match you with what the mission of the donors is. So you're doing the work, the donors want it done, and she's going to connect you.
That is absolutely true. You did a great job speaking for me, and thanks for inviting me, Meredith. I'm really glad that this worked out today. It was a pleasure to meet all of you, even if I just saw your name on the screen. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.